Running Sentences presents A Judge, a Jury, and a Sheriff. Part 8. Dr. Rodney. A middling doctor, tired, exhausted, with having to deal with so much, is trying to get through another scheduled shift. It isn't going well today. This story is written and narrated by Michael Honnery. This is a work of fiction. Any names, characters, businesses, events, and situations within this story are products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to real people, real situation, and/or events and characters is purely coincidental. This story is black satire and is not meant to be taken seriously. Copyright 2023. Michael Honnery. All rights reserved. Dr. Rodney Gardner opened the door to an examination room tiredly and stepped inside, trying to remember all he'd been told by a nurse. The problem was that she told him about 3 patients all at once, and that he needed to see them in that order. It had also been really quickly told to him, which didn't help, and most of what she said was already gone as he looked up from the folder in his hand to see an empty examination bed. He looked down at the folder to see the name on it, Carter Willows, and sighed. He took a few further steps in to see the man he was looking for huddled in the corner of the room, against the wall. "They're coming for me." "We've talked about this, Carter. You have no evidence of anyone coming for you." "It's all because of that case." "I've heard you say that a lot, and I want to help you, but coming in here ranting and raving about a case isn't going to help us." "You promised." "I did. I sent you to a friend of mine who is a psychiatrist who could talk to you about this whole thing. You didn't show up for your appointment, did you?" There was an emphatic shake of his head no, to which Rodney sighed and sat down on the floor not far from his patient. What to do and say to help this poor soul get the help he needed? Was there anything that could be said, or was this just a matter for security? "What was this case again?" "It was the case of Don v. Don, or whatever it was called. It was one of those cases that managed to get to jury, and I had to deal with horrors sitting through it." "So what was bad about it?" "Everything. Did you know it involved this hospital? Not directly, mind you, but because of the collection agency the hospital had hired." Thinking back on it, Rodney had remembered hearing about such a thing, but at the time he wasn't a worker here and he was merely a medical student. He wondered if the hospital had been a better place to work than what it was now. It was all vague rumors because the courthouse had been ordered closed to the public and that the ruling had been sealed up and nobody was to talk about it. It was all very strange, and the only person who had ever wanted to talk about it was now before him. But Carter never really talked about it either. He merely raved about the edges of it. "I've heard about it, yes. What about this case? What is it that makes you so jumpy? Do you think the lawyers are going to send people after you or something? Or perhaps the judge? What has got you so bothered that you want to talk about it, but you don't want to talk?" It's complicated. If I talk, they will know, and they keep tracks on everyone from that case. 3 other jurors already died under suspicious circumstances." "How? What happened to them?" Carter is curling himself up even into a bigger ball. "Found by the side of the road, run over several times. They've been talking about the judge, from what I'd heard." "And then all of that was covered up, was it, Carter?" There was a furious nod of his head, yes, as Carter continued his curled into a tight ball position, trying to get low and as tight as he could, as he also looked to a nearby window. The man did appear to be genuinely afraid of his thought-up enemy. Not that Rodney didn't think that this enemy couldn't be real. At this moment, though, with Carter not exactly being stable in the mind, it was hard to know how serious he should take this matter. "It is. The state police and the federal ones are in on the whole thing. I seen it, Doc. You can't take that away from me." But you can't tell me any more, can you? Carter shook his head again. No. I want to live. I'm not going to tell people things if it's going to get me my head run over. Getting back to his feet, Rodney offered his hand to try and get his patient to move and to get him a little bit out of this. There was a look of distrust from this patient and who didn't take up the offer. Unless you're here for the reported physical as requested by yourself, I can't do anything for you and you can't stay here. So why are you here? Why are you even here, Carter, if you can't talk about what you want to talk about and you don't want to be here? Because you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. To his surprise, though, Carter had suddenly jumped up with a wild look about the examination room. He muttered something in a spatter of words, and then pushed past and out the door in a hurry. Following him out into the hallway, Rodney was surprised to see that the figure of Carter was quickly disappearing from sight, and it was not in the direction of the exit. Fearing the worst, he ran towards where he'd seen the man go, trying to get the attention of any nurses as he went. "Sir?" "Potentially unwell mental patient on the loose running around. Security, please." "Security?" "Yes, please, hurry." Since we don't know what else he might do. The man's name is Carter Willows." The nurse was on the phone in an instant as he hurried away. Rodney ran from one spot to the next, hospital rooms, storage closets, other hallways, the MRI area, and came up with no sign of Mr. Willows anywhere that he ran. His looks about the place became more and more frantic as he went, since having a patient on the loose potentially meant he was going to be blamed for it, and that was a sure way to piss off upper management and get himself fired, which he did not want. Final clatter of steps, Rodney found himself out in the emergency room lobby looking about for Carter. He was getting plenty of looks from curious people and head shakes now from the nurses who had heard the call. A second later, the PA system blared on. "A patient known as Carter Williams has left the premises. I repeat, a patient has left the building." Rodney gave a brief sigh of relief that was jolted when he was slapped on the back. "You're mighty wide and jumpy today." Swinging towards this voice, Rodney found his friend Kevin, who was a morgue worker and mostly held bodies down in the basement. They didn't actually have a morgue on site, but there was a place to store those who had recently deceased before moving it on to a better location. He growled at his friend out of frustration. "Whoa, what's wrong with you today? Was that sudden alert of a patient on the loose all because of you? Man, you have no luck lately. I'm sure the boss is probably going to learn about this, and you probably can't keep it quiet." "Yes, the patient ran away on me, Kevin. And he's been suffering from a potential psychotic break. I have no choice in what goes on here and what he does. I tried to help him." "Oh yeah, bosses won't like that at all. Fuck them though. They don't like us doing our work in the first place. By the way, came to find you." The sudden change of discussion was enough to send Rodney's mind spinning. No matter what, Kevin always reverted the conversation to whatever it is that he wanted to talk about. "What is it? I have cases to attend to. I have 2 people waiting in waiting rooms." "I've got dead people from that church to attend to." "Wait, the 2 murders from the church?" Rodney's mind was now even more spinning, since why would he care about dead bodies from a church? "More than 2, and yes." "More? And why are they here, not at the morgue?" There was a sly grin from Kevin, which meant something was up. It was never a good sign when his friend smiled, since trouble always found him, and he always got dragged deep into it. Kevin stepped a few steps away and made a follow-him motion. The temptation of oddity was too much, and Rodney found himself following just to see what it was that Kevin was going to get him into. Down in the cold basement, there was a holding area that had several freezers for bodies. It was an unpleasant place that smelled of cleaning ingredients that had sat for too long, and everything had been stained with bleach-like chemicals to make sure that everything stayed clean. Kevin was quick to get up over to a table that had a cloth on it and grabbed it, waiting for Rodney to come over, which he did, crinkling up his nose as he did. This place stinks? It could be worse if you weren't for all the chemicals. You get used to it. He began pulling away at the sheet. No, I don't think I ever will, Kevin. I don't think I ever will. With a flourish of action, Kevin yanked the white sheet, covering most of the body away. The naked figure of a man was stuck in a seated position with his legs up, locked into that position. It was a pale human who looked middle-aged and terribly thin. What do you think of this? Malnutrition at first sight. Why are you showing me this? Is this why you want me to come down here to look at this and help you figure out what's happened to these people? Kevin nodded his head over to another table, yanked off that cloth that covered that one. Under it revealed another, similar-looking person, only this one was female. I have several figures who all look the same. They came from this church, aside from the two with bullet holes riddling them. He moved about, revealing a couple of the others hidden under the cloth, male and female, all in sitting positions, and stuck that way. None of these were the murdered ones, right, that we heard about? Nope, and we have to keep this a secret since it will create a media scrum, apparently. The media around here don't care about anything unless they can make a big deal about it and money's involved, or they can pin it on somebody without any real basis. Oh yeah, I don't care about that. As Kevin was saying this, he began putting sheets back over bodies. I want you to help me figure out what the cause of death was, even if it is a quick once-over. Why do you need me? Cops asked for a quick summary since the morgue isn't operating right now. Shaking his head in frustration, Dr. Rodney Gardner began examining the body that was closest to him, the first male, that had been uncovered. He was looking for signs of any maltreatment, which was quite obviously what had happened here. He then went over to a couple of the other ones, checking, seeing what he could see. All looked to be undernourished and have a sort of mummified in a closed environment from the air look to them. These were found in a church. In the secret space beneath it, the place reportedly has cells that were like monks and shit or something. One of the cops told me they found lots of radical writing done by these people, something like that. All about, collection of money or something like that. Anyway, I don't really know, I don't really care, I just need the cause so that I can write it up and push them out of here. Rodney, however, was staring at one of them, trying to get a good look at it. They all look familiar to me. Kevin was quick, though, and tossed the blanket over the one that had been closest to him, causing Rodney to jump back in surprise when he saw his friend shaking his head now. Don't think about who they once were, or who they were, or anything about them. We have no idea who's behind this, and we don't want to know. Our job is simply to say what these people died from. Rodney was still struggling with all of this, and he was pretty sure that these were people from around town, or formerly around town, or the area. He wasn't... Maybe he'd seen them at a hospital function, or maybe not. He wasn't sure. But there were two murders at the church, aren't those the big thing? I mean, wouldn't the murders be related to this? What is even going on? There was a shrug of, I don't even know, from his friend, who finished making sure that the bodies were fully covered, and did so in a hurried pace to make sure that if anyone were to wander in, they wouldn't be able to see anything, or anyone who was here. To Rodney, he couldn't shake the image that something had scared his friend, who never worked at a quick pace, yet here he was doing exactly that. The man clearly did not want these figures around, and why did he drag him down here if it was just checking over the bodies? He was a doctor too. He should be able to justify his readings of the situation, and there were plenty of other doctors who he could turn to and things over as well. Why him? Are you all right, Kevin? The man spun about, heading over to him, trying to usher him out of the room. Perfect, fine, lovely. I don't want the police around here asking me questions about what I do or don't know, what I know and what I don't know, and all of this is a big situation. You do like to smoke pot, from what I remember. No, not that. Some other stuff that has followed me around. Old connections with not-so-great people I once knew. Once cops think that you know bad people, they don't let things go. Single-minded pricks. It took no time for Rodney to get back to his station and helping examine incoming patients who aren't in need of instant medical care. He stood lost in thought onto the side of the hallway, trying not to get in anyone's way. It was only the second hour of his shift, and that feeling of this was going to be a long day was already crushing his soul. "Doctor, you're wanted in room 6. He nodded, took the files she offered him, as he only semi-snapped out of his thoughtful state. The patient, no doubt, would be much like the rest that came here, either suffering from depression and high blood pressure, or suicidal thanks to debts that they were suffering from. He entered the room he was pointed towards and saw a nervous-looking woman scratching at her arms. There were hives all over them, and she couldn't seem to stop as both hands tried to itch away those hives. Rodney tried to offer a smile, but she seemed to be staring off in the distance, not paying the least bit of attention to anyone, and just sort of automatically operating, scratching away. "Miss Duncan, are you all right?" "So many problems, so little time." "Well, that ain't good. Can you please stop scratching yourself? You're only doing harm by doing that and not letting the skin heal on its own." There was a moment, and then she actually did stop, but this was replaced by a rocking back and forth motion. There was nothing he could do at the moment other than go sit down on his chair, which he did so. "Now, Miss Duncan, you have come in due to stress," he said as he looked over her file. Yes, it's ruining everything in my life, see?" She lifted her hand towards her hair, and with a gentle tug some of her dirty blonde hair came away in her hand. It was held out for him, and he took it, looking it over, and then gently put it down on a nearby table. "And, do you think you know what is causing this?" "I was told doctors don't like self-diagnosis. It's also that they can make their own observations and He nodded along as he was listening and looking at her folder. What he was not doing was paying attention to her, as she was pulling out more hair and trying to offer it to him. Yes, but you also have an idea potentially of what is causing the stress, enough to make you break out in hives and or lose your hair." He looked up and didn't want to take the hair, but he had no choice, and tried to think of a way to get her to stop doing this. "Bills." "Oh, yes, you owe money to someone?" He already knew where this was going, and the fact that this examination might potentially add to that debt made him wince. There was nothing he could do, though, since the state didn't offer low-income insurance to anyone. The collection agency and the organization I joined, who promised if I pay into them, I could sell lots of products, and then I keep having to buy products, and I can't sell the products, and Rodney blinked, trying to figure out who or what kind of serious business would work in that way. It sounded much like a middle management company, and he didn't really know much about them other than generally people didn't like them and that they sold weird products. But he shook his head as he wrote out a prescription for a pill that might take off the edge. "You aren't allergic to anything, right, Miss Duncan? You haven't changed in that way?" "You have my file in front of you." "Yes, but people can become allergic to things that they've had in their lives before. It happens all the time. Too much of a good thing or too little of a good thing, and suddenly a reaction. Human bodies are mysterious." She shook her head no, that she didn't know of any allergic reactions, and so he ripped the prescription off of his little pad and handed it over to her. "Take these once a day, and only when you're feeling bad." She snatched it out of his hand and was gone out of the room a second later. Feeling beaten down, he slowly wrote some notes onto the file and got up from his chair, hoping he was doing the right thing as he exited. A minute later, Rodney found himself nearby at the nurse's station to see if they had any news on things around the hospital. He was curious to see if his patient had been caught, but there was no word on that, and he found himself watching the people that shambled by in a zombie-like nervous tics here and there. Worse, they all seemed to have that stare that went on forever and didn't take much to figure out where they got it from. Too much stress and too much debt. "Sir, there's a patient in room 12 waiting for you." He looked up to see the nurse who'd approached with a file in her hand. She looked dead serious and like the type who couldn't offer a smile in this dreary place. He didn't want to blame her for not smiling, but it might have livened things up a little bit. Not that he could smile either, or liven things up. He glanced at the file name. Thank you. What is a patient Cola complaining about?" "Heart palpitations." That was not what he was expecting, and he wasn't sure if he should be relieved or not. It only took him a second to connect the two, and Rodney figured that it was entirely possible that the heart problems were from debt-induced stress, and it was likely all related. He began heading for the room, nervously hoping, against hope, that that was not the case. Laid out on the examination bed was a young woman, in her early 20s, who went by the name Cola Florence Christian. It was an appropriate name, because she was murmuring some version of the Lord's prayers, just loud enough to be heard, but in a mumbled fashion. He glanced over at her to see anything wrong as he went towards his chair to sit down in this new room. The way she was staring at the ceiling had a look that said 1,000-yard stare, and whatever was in the ceiling was enthralling to look at. Miss Florence, Miss Cola Florence Christian, are you there? Can we talk?" She went right on murmuring things he couldn't hear, but recognized as a chanted prayer. "You've come in because of heart issues, is that correct?" No response as the chants continued onward and on. "If you don't mind, I have a stethoscope and I would like to listen to your heart. I want to hear what you say is going on inside of you. Is that okay? I will need you to stop chanting, if that's okay." This time she stopped and unclenched her hands that were in front of her chest in a very prayer-like pose, but this now seemed to be all gone as he wheeled his way towards her in his chair. No words came from her mouth that would affirm or deny, allowing him to check her heartbeat. "I'm going to gently place this end piece on your chest between your breasts. Please nod if that is okay." He guessed that there was a subtle but firm sort of shake of her head yes. At least he hoped that's what it was. Wasn't sure if it was a twitch or not, but he gently moved the head of the stethoscope towards her chest and placed it down to listen for signs. The thump, thump sound came through loud and clear. It was a bit faster than he was expecting, and that caused him to frown. It seemed like there would be very little chance of getting her to actually talk about her problem and what might be causing this. But he had to ask. Can you please sit up? I need to listen to your heart from your back." She looked over, confused and not understanding what he wanted fully, but with a few hand signs, she slowly sat up as he gently pressed the stethoscope against her back, near the center. The beat was still steady, but fast, which was not good nor healthy. With a sigh, he pushed himself and his chair away from her as he heard all he could hear. He could hook up an EKG, but that seemed like it would be an expensive option, and he wasn't sure that he would get permission for that from anyone. There were two things that he could do, and neither of them that he really liked. He could send her home, telling her to report back if she felt that something was off, or have her submitted for a battery of tests. The latter option was an expensive one, and judging from her simple dress, she might not be able to afford that. But to send her home could also lead to her death and lawsuits. He did not like the idea of either option. Yes, Miss Florence, Miss Cola Florence, Christian, do you have something you wish to say about your health?" "I don't think I should be here." I wish most people could avoid being here, but life is never that kind. Are you afraid of hospitals, or is it something else? What's wrong? What's the matter? She looked about with a quick glance here and there, looking for something in these walls or something. It was for a couple of mere seconds before trying to look at something else and never really settled down. My husband wouldn't like that I'm here, I think. And why is that? Oh, we don't have the money to pay for it. He doesn't have the money to pay for it. And have you told this to the check-in station? She nodded feebly as he thought of ways to try and help. There were still frantic bursts of energy as she was looking about and not settling down. I take it that you don't want to be checked in, then, so I can only tell you to go home and keep track of your symptoms and come back when you can, and if you can afford it. Am I going to be charged a lot for this visit? No. If you don't have insurance, just tell that to the checkout section of the hospital. And tell them that the education section will be covering the fees. I don't understand. Part of this hospital is built for education. We do low-income checkups for minor fees and so on. However, we are told only to tell people in extreme cases. So please don't go spreading that around. Okay? She nodded as she slipped off the examination table in a hurry and began getting dressed from the little gown that she had on. Rodney made a few marks in her file and closed it so he, too, could leave after she was gone. Having managed to get through a few patients, Rodney was granted a slight reprieve and got back to his own office. He had some important patient files to look over and figure out what was going on with them. The lab work had been backed up for ages, and there had been a promise that some had been done, which had him hopeful as he entered his office. A simple space set up in the corner on the 4th floor, away from most things, and it would have more style if he had time for such things. He settled in behind his desk, but only got a few moments of quiet before the door opened and in came fellow Dr. Hand's card. Hey, have you got a minute? Not really, no. I need to work on my patient's files and figure out if the lab work has been done. You got the lab to do lab work? Potentially. I haven't had a chance to look yet. Is there something you need? What do you need, or why are you here? Hans made his way and sat down opposite, putting on a folder in front of him. Take a wild guess as to why a doctor would visit another doctor. Consultation, but I don't have any specialty that would warrant consultation and such things. No, but about certain unseen things that are going on around here. With an odd look, Rodney glanced towards the file that had been laid on his desk and tried to sort out what his fellow doctor was trying to say. It could be that he was referring to the holding of the dead bodies down in the basement, but maybe not. Most of our work here is working on the unseen enemy inside the human body. But dead ones? I was warned to avoid that topic of many dead people sitting around doing nothing. They're from the church, though. Rodney merely nodded yes, not sure if he should proceed or not, or what exactly was going on. It's just that the hospital has ties to that church, and it's rather suspicious that such people, or former people, were brought here instead of to the morgue. I heard the morgue was shut down for the day, or whatever. No, it's been running full speed with no bodies currently in there. I called and talked to them about a recent patient who passed away. And the holding room downstairs is apparently full. Unsure of why this was being brought before him, Rodney merely tried to hide his puzzled expression and shrugged to his associate. What did this have to do with him? What did it matter to him? Why are you getting me involved in this? I don't really know much. Don't you want to know you're working for a shady organization? A shady hospital that does whatever it can to make money? I think we all already knew that when we saw the state of the hospital and how it cheaps out on everything from nurses' pay to supplies. We need to tell the world about this and what's going on. I can't live with being an accomplice to this madness. You're going to the press with it. And the police, potentially. Rodney sat back in his chair, folding his arms over his chest, thinking about this matter and trying to figure it out and push through this muck and mire. It was a good stance to take, no doubt, about that, but, would anyone believe them? You have lots of evidence, I assume? His fellow doctor nodded his head furiously. Well, some, actually, and I'm working to get more. All of the hospital records are still on paper, and it's hard to get over to the administration office without being noticed, so it's taking a little while, but yeah, I'm getting there. Who else of the staff do you have working with you? It was at this point that Hans became a bit more suspicious as he moved a little forward in his chair. Why do you want to know all of a sudden? Well, you're bringing me into this, and if you're doing this, it would be better to have several people instead of just a few. And you need lots of evidence to bring before important federal agents, and you have to trust the federals and the local police and everybody. Otherwise, everybody's just gonna shut you down. His fellow doctor still looked about, unsure of him and if he trusted him anymore, or he was already half out of his seat, grabbing up his file that he'd put on the desk. Yeah, that sounds about right. I'm not saying don't go and do it, but if I were to join your party in its rebellion, I need to know how many people and, what's going on with you, so it makes it easier to stand up. There was a nervous nod from Hans Card, who was quickly gone. He just left the room. To Rodney, it seemed like this meant that the man did not trust that he'd been asking questions. But he got lost in thought about the whole matter and realized he probably should have just kept his mouth shut and let the doctor talk. He would have gotten more information that way. Oh well, he would have to wait until he would see him later to see if this was worth pursuing or not. For now, his cases were more important, and Rodney grabbed up the first case files on a patient named Jimbo Bones, who had a mysterious tumor near his stomach. It was growing, and they'd done a biopsy on it, sending it off to the lab to get worked on. That had been 4 months ago. Tentatively, he opened the folder, hoping to see lab results had been deposited in when he'd filed them away for getting such information last week. There were no new filings or paperwork when he opened it, and he sighed and began reaching for his phone. A few seconds later, he was tapping out the number from memory. More time went by as he put his phone to his ear and waited for the ringtone, and then the busy signals, and then the elevator-like wait music, before somebody finally picked it up. Hello. Gloria, good to hear your voice. It is Dr. Rodney Carter, and I'm supposed to have some lab results back from the labs. I don't have them. We delivered any files we had yesterday. I know you're scheduled terribly well, as we've had this conversation many times in the last couple months. If it isn't in your files and it wasn't mailed to you, then we have not done the work yet. Rodney took a moment to compose himself so that he did not blow up at Gloria. She was nice enough and was only the phone person for the laboratory. She couldn't push paperwork any faster, and yelling would likely get her telling her co-workers to actually delay things if they listened to her. He took in a few deep gasps of air before trying to speak again. It's been 4 months. The sample may be dead by now, if you're not careful. Hold on, let me check to see which lab work request you have out. There was a moment's pause, and she didn't put the phone on hold. He could tell because he could hear her soft humming and the click and clack of keys as she typed. Honestly, he was kind of grateful that he did not have to listen to awful elevator music as he waited. Let's see here. 7 cases, 2 biopsies, 3 blood works, 1 urine, and the other sample of, oh, yes, that stuff. Yuck. There was more fumbling with the phone before she realized she hadn't put it on hold. Doctor. Yes, what is the bad news you have for me? All your samples are missing. There was more than a moment's pause as he tried to keep himself in check from the absolute top of his head blowing off. Please find them at once, or I shall call every executive and board member I know, plus all the doctors' associations and everyone else, to tell them what the lab has done. I will look into it. He hung up the phone, knowing that was probably a lie, and quickly looked over the other files he had. With no reports, he was going to have to make calls later, explaining to patient that things were stuck, and that was not something he wanted to deal with, not at this moment or any in the future. So he got up and headed for the door, since he could not do anything in his office today. A short walk around found him in the break room as he wheeled about in here. There were a few others, but they all seemed to be paying attention to their own business as he went back and forth between the couch area and the snack table, trying to get out that sudden frustration and ready to explode. What has got you bothered today, Doc? Rodney stopped to stare at his own fellow doctor, who was sitting on a reclining chair that was fully pushed into the reclined position. The usual when it comes to things, labs and being unable to help patients. If you want to help patients, you're better off going to another state to do it. This state and everyone doesn't like the idea of healthcare without, unless you have lots of money, and then if you have lots of money, you're going to other states. I know, but I can still hope to help, can't I? There was a head shake from this Dr. Luke who was talking to him. Best to just get by like the rest of us. Ignore what's going on and tell them when you can tell them, and otherwise it's all just floating by. I don't know if I can do that, Dr. Luke. And by the way, has Dr. Hans come to talk to you about his potential plan? There was a pause as Luke studied him carefully. He seemed to know something of it, and he seemed very guarded on that matter. I think a grand idea was mentioned. I told him it was foolish since few people would care, and if it did work, they would only last for a day or two before the next news cycle, national, international, local, probably took it all away. Rodney felt his soul being crushed that little bit more, every other word. It does feel like we should do something now. The only thing we can do is move away. If no one works here, then eventually someone might pay attention. Doubt it, though. So we're doomed to work here trying to help those in need while putting them in precarious situations and not really helping. Doesn't seem terribly helpful. This is the life of a doctor around here. Work, depression about trying to help, helping a little while sending people to death. Round and round we go. That isn't helpful in the slightest to anyone, and it probably harms us just as much. And it just lets things happen again and again. It's just history repeating itself, isn't it? His head was beginning to hurt from thinking about this and arguing the point with the other doctor, who didn't appear to be listening to what he was saying. And to be fair, he wasn't really listening to Luke either. Instead, he decided he was going to leave the break room to get a break from it. 2 steps out into the hallway, though, he saw another face that he didn't particularly want to see. The CEO had come down from his perch in the building away from the hospital, and with his hands behind his back. The little old man seemed to be studying everyone as Rodney took a few steps away from John Nichols, who noticed him and shuffled his way over. Doctor. Sir, it is good to see you, Rodney was saying as he turned to face to the CEO. Yes, it is. I've heard some rumors going about the place that I don't like. I wanted to touch base with some people. Rodney felt his heart begin beating harder and faster. It was an uncomfortable flutter of a thump. What rumors are they about? What's this about? Oh, the usual riffraff of nonsense. Doctors telling patients how they might get free care and so on. Plus talk of dead bodies when we don't even have a morgue. We have a holding station. And no dead bodies because we don't keep bodies. It's all silly, really, and there's one other one I can't remember exactly off the top of my head. What's so wrong about helping patients in need of financial assistance? Well, I'm all for it if we had the money for it. State provides none, and we only get so much from donors, so we can't actually provide it. Though I heard that somebody told somebody how they might get some. Rodney was just trying not to get angry at this as the words crawled over him. So we'll have to send them to the depths of debt, sicking a collection agency on them, even though they don't have any money. So how does that make any sense? How's that helping anyone? The CEO had stopped as he passed by Rodney and looked him over, carefully studying him. You're one of those ones who might be helping out my opponent, aren't you? Sir, I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm here to help my patients, that is all. By the way, your laboratory hasn't cleared its backlog of work. That's not my problem. And they work right they're good at. It is, though, sir. Your own case is one of the many stuck in the process. You don't want to die without knowing what's going on with you, or do you? This caused the CEO to pause for a moment and nod his head as he considered his options. Well, I can't actually rush them. It would make me look bad, wouldn't it, if everyone found out that I rushed my results to the front? And other patients will die if you don't go to the laboratory you hired and pay them to get the damn stuff done. And that includes you. You will die, sir. It looks terrible from what the X-rays I have been consulted on said. The CEO now fully turned to Rodney and waved a shaking finger in his face. Watch it. Or what? You'll fire me? This hospital is already running on so few staff that it cannot operate well. You firing me will only hurt your bottom line. Shut up and stop talking so loudly around here. No. Fine. Take your story to the press and all that will listen to you. If they will listen to you, I have enough reporters on my side of things and my workers and evidence of malpractice to drown out any cries that this place is terrible to work at, and I'm sure I can rustle up files on your work that is terrible. This day was just thing after thing for Rodney, and he'd had enough. He still wanted to work here, and he still desperately wanted to help the patients, but, this was getting a bit much. I'm trying to save this place and help you. If you fire me, you're not doing any good. No, you're not trying to help, and you're fired for being in association with those that are breaking their non-disclosure agreements. You have been talking to too many people. So good riddance and goodbye. End of Part 8 of A Judge, a Jury, and a Sheriff. Thank you for listening.